March 1980, Philadelphia. Gentle dawn. Angelo Bruno, head of the Philadelphia Mafia, never saw it coming. A hitman pressed a gun against his head and blew the Godfather's brains out. What followed wasn't just another mob succession. It was the beginning of a war that would pit two of America's most dangerous criminal organizations against each other in the most unexpected ways. When Nicomado, Little Nicky Scarfo, took control of the Bruno crime family, he made a fatal mistake. His collectors approached the wrong target, the Philadelphia chapter of the Pagans Motorcycle Club. Instead of fear, they got laughter. Instead of compliance, they got war. This isn't your typical organized crime story. This is about what happens when two completely different criminal ecosystems collide, when the old-school Italian-American mafia's codes of honor meet the brutal militaristic world of outlaw motorcycle clubs. From Canadian battlefields to California drug wars, we're about to explore the most shocking confrontations between bikers and the mob. Today you'll discover how a biker gang once forced the Italian Mafia to pay them $5,000 in damages. How motorcycle clubs infiltrated traditional mafia operations and turned their own rules against them. And why some of these unlikely partnerships became the most profitable criminal enterprises in North American history. But first, let me show you how this war really began, and why neither side was prepared for what was coming. The Pagans versus Philadelphia. When bikers said no, the Pagans Motorcycle Club wasn't your typical outlaw biker gang. Founded in 1959, they had evolved into one of the big four most feared motorcycle clubs in America, alongside the Hells Angels, Outlaws, and Banditos. But what made them unique was their reported connections to both the Italian Mafia and the Aryan Brotherhood, a criminal network that spanned racial and organizational lines. When Scarfo's muscle approached the Pagans demanding tribute payments for operating in Philadelphia, they had no idea what they were walking into. The Pagans weren't street dealers or small-time criminals who could be easily intimidated. These were military veterans, organized in a hierarchical structure that mirrored both motorcycle clubs and military units. The bikers' response was swift and brutal. They didn't just refuse to pay, they laughed at Scarfo's enforcers and sent them away empty-handed. This represented something unprecedented in Mafia history, an organized criminal group that refused to acknowledge La Cosa Nostra's authority. But the real confrontation came in April 1982, during a meeting about methamphetamine distribution between the Philadelphia mob and the Pagans. Despite their differences, both organizations had found common ground in drug trafficking. However, when underboss Salvatore "Chucky" Merlino deliberately rammed his car into a Pagans motorcycle, injuring the rider, he crossed a line that would define biker mafia relations for decades. The Pagans' retaliation was calculated and comprehensive. They firebombed a car belonging to one of Merlino's associates, then launched targeted shooting attacks on both Capo regime Salvatore Testa's house and Merlino's mother's residence where he was staying. This wasn't random violence. It was strategic warfare designed to send a message about the consequences of disrespecting motorcycle club members. The conflict resolution revealed something fascinating about the power dynamics between these two criminal organizations. To settle the matter, the Philadelphia Mafia was forced to pay the Pagans $5,000 for the injured rider's medical expenses and motorcycle damage. Think about that for a moment. One of America's oldest mafia families had to pay tribute to a motorcycle club. This payment established a precedent that would echo throughout organized crime. Motorcycle clubs weren't just another street gang that could be bullied or absorbed. They were organized, disciplined, and capable of inflicting serious damage on traditional organized crime families. The aftermath saw an uneasy truce between the Philadelphia mob and the Pagans, but the relationship had fundamentally changed. The Mafia had learned that bikers operated under different rules, with different loyalty structures and different approaches to violence. More importantly, they discovered that motorcycle clubs could be valuable partners in drug trafficking operations, if treated with respect. The Montreal Alliance, Rizzuto, Boucher, and the Canadian Experiment. While Philadelphia was learning hard lessons about biker mafia relations, something remarkable was happening 500 miles north in Montreal. Vito Rizzuto, the most powerful mafia boss in Canadian history, was doing something that would have been unthinkable to his Sicilian ancestors. He was building a criminal consortium that included motorcycle clubs as equal partners. Rizzuto's approach was revolutionary. Instead of trying to dominate or eliminate rival criminal organizations, he created what criminologists call a consortium, a business-like arrangement where different groups maintain their independence while coordinating their activities. At the center of this network were the Hells Angels, led by Maurice Mom Boucher, one of the most feared biker leaders in North American history. The partnership worked brilliantly because each organization brought different strengths to the table. The Rizzuto crime family provided political connections, money laundering expertise, and international drug trafficking networks reaching from Sicily to South America. The Hells Angels brought muscle, distribution networks, and the ability to coordinate with other motorcycle clubs across North America. Between 1994 and 2002, this alliance was tested during the Quebec Biker War, the deadliest motorcycle club conflict in North American history. The war began when the Hells Angels attempted to monopolize Montreal's drug market by eliminating their rivals, the Rock Machine. What followed was 8 years of unprecedented violence, over 160 deaths, 130 cases of arson, 80 bombings, and 20 disappearances. The Rizzuto family's role as mediator in this conflict demonstrated the sophisticated nature of their relationship with the bikers. When violence threatened to spiral out of control and damage everyone's business, Vito Rizzuto personally brokered a truce between Boucher and Rock Machine leader Frederick Faucher. On October 8, 2000, these deadly enemies sat down for dinner at Bleu Martin restaurant, shook hands, hugged, and broke bread together, while photographers documented the reconciliation. To seal the truce, both biker leaders then visited the Super Sex, Montreal's most exclusive strip club, in a display of unity that sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld. One Hells Angel joked to waiting police officers that with the truce in effect, the police budget could be cut drastically. However, this peace was short-lived. The truce collapsed when the Rock Machine agreed to join the Bandidos Motorcycle Club, bringing international motorcycle club politics into the Canadian underworld. The violence resumed with even greater intensity, ultimately ending only when law enforcement finally succeeded in arresting key leaders from both sides. Throughout this period, the Rizzuto Hells Angels partnership continued to flourish. Jimmy Cournoyer, a Montreal-based drug kingpin with ties to both organizations, operated a billion-dollar trafficking network that moved marijuana, cocaine, and ecstasy between Canada and the United States. The operation used Hells Angels transportation networks and Rizzuto family money laundering services to create one of the most successful drug trafficking enterprises in North American history. The sophisticated nature of this partnership was revealed in wiretapped phone conversations, where Rizzuto associate Antonio Zappia discussed using those people on motorcycles to collect money, referring to the Hells Angels as reliable enforcers for mafia operations. The New York connection, Bonanno family and biker networks. While Montreal perfected the art of biker mafia cooperation, New York City saw a more complex and often adversarial relationship develop between traditional organized crime families and motorcycle clubs. The Bonanno crime family, one of New York's 5 families, found themselves both competing with and relying on outlaw motorcycle clubs in ways that challenged traditional mafia hierarchies. The relationship began with business necessity. As law enforcement pressure intensified on traditional mafia operations in the 1980s and 1990s, crime families needed new ways to transport drugs and launder money. Motorcycle clubs offered mobile, highly organized networks that could move large quantities of narcotics with minimal law enforcement detection. The Hells Angels, New York chapter, developed documented relationships with both the Gambino and Genovese crime families, providing security and transportation for narcotics deals in exchange for drugs and access to money laundering operations. This wasn't a subordinate relationship, it was a partnership between equals, each bringing specialized skills to collaborative criminal enterprises. One of the most significant operations involved Canadian drug kingpin Jimmy Cournoyer, whose organization maintained connections to both the Rizzuto crime family in Montreal and the Bonanno family in New York. Between 1998 and 2012, this network trafficked more than $1 billion worth of marijuana, cocaine, and ecstasy into the United States using Hells Angels transportation networks and Bonanno family distribution systems. The operation's sophistication was remarkable. Drugs were smuggled from Canada using transportation networks run by the Hells Angels and Native American co-conspirators from the Akwesasne Mohawk Reservation along the U.S.-Canadian border. Once the drugs reached New York, they were distributed through networks connected to the Bonanno crime family. Profits were then used to purchase cocaine from the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico, creating a truly international criminal enterprise. However, the relationship wasn't always smooth. The Bonanno family had been severely weakened by FBI infiltration, most famously by Agent Joseph Pistone, alias Donnie Brasco, who spent 6 years inside the family in the 1970s and 1980s. This breach cost them their seat on the commission and made them more dependent on external partners like motorcycle clubs. The power dynamic became evident in how disputes were resolved. When conflicts arose between Bonanno associates and biker gang members, traditional mafia methods of intimidation often proved ineffective against motorcycle club members who were accustomed to violence and had their own military-style discipline. A particularly revealing incident occurred at a Long Island funeral parlor, where 3 Bonanno made men were sent to prevent former acting boss Joseph Joe C. Camerano from attending a funeral. Instead of backing down when confronted by the bikers providing security, the motorcycle club members beat all 3 made men bloody, a humiliation that would have been unthinkable in the traditional mafia world. The incident demonstrated how motorcycle clubs had fundamentally altered the balance of power in organized crime. Their military backgrounds, physical conditioning, and willingness to engage in immediate violence made them formidable opponents, even for experienced mafia soldiers. By the 2000s, this had evolved into a complex ecosystem where biker gangs and mafia families maintained both competitive and cooperative relationships, depending on the specific situation and potential profits involved. The West Coast Wars, Mongols versus La Mafia. The conflict between the Mongols Motorcycle Club and Italian-American organized crime on the West Coast represents one of the most complex and violent intersections of biker and mafia culture in American criminal history. Unlike the East Coast, where traditional mafia families maintained clear hierarchies, Los Angeles presented a more fragmented criminal landscape, where multiple organizations competed for territory and influence. The Mongols Motorcycle Club was founded in 1969 by Hispanic Vietnam veterans who had been rejected by the Hells Angels due to racial exclusion policies. From the beginning, they positioned themselves as an alternative to the predominantly white motorcycle clubs, creating a unique organization that combined military discipline with street gang culture from East Los Angeles. By the 1980s, the Mongols had won a brutal turf war against the Hells Angels for control of Southern California, establishing themselves as the dominant motorcycle club in Los Angeles. However, their expansion brought them into direct conflict with another powerful criminal organization, the Mexican Mafia, also known as La AME. This conflict revealed the complexity of West Coast organized crime, where Italian-American mafia families, Hispanic prison gangs, and motorcycle clubs all competed for control of lucrative drug trafficking networks. The Los Angeles crime family, dubbed the Mickey Mouse Mafia by law enforcement due to their relatively small size compared to East Coast families, found themselves navigating between these more powerful and violent organizations. The Mongols' relationship with the Mexican Mafia began cooperatively in the early 1970s. Prior to Ruben Doc Cavazos becoming president, the club was allied with La AME both on the streets and in prison. To bolster their membership during their war with the Hells Angels, the Mongols began recruiting members from Sureño street gangs, including notorious groups like the Avenues and 18th Street. This recruitment strategy created internal tensions within the motorcycle club world. Many new Mongols members didn't even own motorcycles, violating traditional biker club bylaws. However, the club relaxed their standards to match the Hells Angels in numbers, with some East Los Angeles gang veterans joining the Mongols Enforcer Squad and wearing special ELA Enforcer patches. The partnership with the Mexican Mafia began to deteriorate in 2004 when La AME demanded tribute payments from the increasingly successful Mongols' drug operations. After the club had lost several members in conflicts with Sureño gangs over drug territory, Mexican Mafia shot callers sent word that the Sureños had sustained over $20,000 in lost drug revenue and demanded compensation. The Mexican Mafia's message was clear and threatening: pay the tribute or face the green light, a death sentence that would make every Mongols member a target for murder by Sureños, both in custody and on the streets. This represented the same type of extortion demand that had triggered conflicts between bikers and the Italian Mafia in other cities. The Mongols' response mirrored what the Pagans had done in Philadelphia. 2 decades earlier, they refused to pay. This decision triggered a war between the Motorcycle Club and the Mexican Mafia that resulted in casualties on both sides and demonstrated the limits of traditional prison gang authority. When confronted by well-organized biker clubs, the conflict was eventually resolved through negotiation, but it established important precedents about the relationship between motorcycle clubs and traditional organized crime groups on the West Coast. The Mongols maintained their independence while continuing to cooperate in drug trafficking operations, creating a model that other biker clubs would follow. The resolution of this conflict also highlighted how the Italian-American Los Angeles crime family had been marginalized in the city's criminal ecosystem. By the 2000s, they were no longer a major player in local organized crime, replaced by more violent and better organized groups like the Mexican Mafia and Outlaw motorcycle clubs. The Blood Family Rebellion, Quebec's new generation challenge. In 2023, something unprecedented happened in Quebec's criminal underworld. For decades, the Hells Angels had maintained iron control over the province's drug trade through a sophisticated tax system. Independent dealers and smaller gangs paid a 10% tax to the Hells Angels in exchange for the right to operate in their territory. This system had generated millions in revenue and kept violent competition to a minimum. Then came the Blood Family Mafia, a young, aggressive street gang that decided they'd had enough of paying tribute to aging bikers. Led by 27-year-old David Pick Termal, the BFM represented a new generation of organized crime that rejected traditional hierarchies and territorial arrangements. What made this rebellion particularly shocking was the Blood Family Mafia's tactics. Unlike previous challengers to the Hells Angels' dominance, the BFM embraced methods more commonly associated with Central American cartels than Canadian street gangs. They utilized kidnapping, torture, and extreme violence in ways that even hardened criminals found disturbing. According to criminologist Maria Murani, the BFM's approach to violence represented something entirely new in Quebec's criminal landscape. It's not something that is common in Quebec's street gangs, she explained. Is this a new way of doing business? We'll see. The gang's signature tactic was the public release of torture videos, showing their victims suffering extreme violence. In one documented case, they kidnapped a drug dealer who had decided to stop working for the organization, inviting him to what he thought was a farewell party. Instead, the victim endured what Quebec media called a night of horror, beaten repeatedly, subjected to waterboarding 3 times, and had his feet burned before being murdered and mutilated. This wasn't random sadism. It was calculated psychological warfare designed to terrorize competitors and demonstrate that the BFM was more ruthless than any existing criminal organization in Quebec. The gang allegedly released videos showing them torturing Hells Angels members, directly challenging the motorcycle club's reputation for violence. The conflict escalated when the BFM ceased paying their 10% tax to the Hells Angels in 2023. This wasn't just a business dispute. It was an open declaration of war against Quebec's most powerful criminal organization. According to journalist Félix Séguin, Termal had decided to attack the Hells Angels of the Quebec chapter head-on. The Hells Angels' response revealed how much the criminal landscape had changed since their heyday in the 1990s and early 2000s. Instead of launching immediate violent retaliation, they found themselves negotiating with the younger gang. Very rare thing, in the case of Quebec, the Hells do not retaliate, Séguin noted. They are even negotiating a truce. This represented a fundamental shift in power dynamics. The aging leadership of the Hells Angels, many now in their 50s and 60s, were being challenged by violent young criminals who had grown up in an era of social media, extreme content, and cartel-style violence. The contrast between the elderly biker leadership and youthful BFM members became a symbol of changing power structures in organized crime. The situation became so volatile that, according to criminologist Marani, the Hells Angels leadership reportedly approached law enforcement with an unusual request. What my sources tell me is that the Hells were telling the police, "Do something, because otherwise, we will be the ones to act." This unprecedented plea for police intervention demonstrated how the Blood Family Mafia's rebellion had destabilized Quebec's criminal ecosystem. The traditional order, where the Hells Angels maintained peace through controlled violence and taxation, was being replaced by unpredictable chaos that threatened everyone's business interests. In February 2024, Quebec Provincial Police arrested 21 people in a large-scale operation targeting the conflict. The charges range from torture and mutilation to drug trafficking, indicating the extreme nature of the violence that had erupted between the two organizations. The BFM rebellion represents the emergence of a new model of organized crime that combines traditional street gang structures with modern digital communication and extreme violence tactics borrowed from international cartels. Their willingness to challenge established criminal hierarchies suggests that the era of stable territorial arrangements between different criminal organizations may be ending. The modern evolution, digital age alliances. Today's biker mafia relationships have evolved far beyond the crude territorial disputes and violent confrontations of previous decades. Modern criminal organizations have embraced sophisticated technology, international networks, and complex financial instruments that make their partnerships both more profitable and more difficult to detect. The 2025 arrests of Leonardo Rizzuto and other Montreal Mafia figures revealed how these relationships have adapted to the digital age. Police investigations uncovered evidence of ongoing cooperation between traditional Italian-American crime families, Hells Angels chapters, and various street gangs and criminal enterprises spanning multiple countries, and involving billions of dollars in drug trafficking and money laundering. Modern biker mafia partnerships now utilize encrypted communications, cryptocurrency transactions, and social media platforms for recruitment and coordination. The Blood Family Mafia's use of torture videos and social media intimidation represents just one example of how these organizations have adapted traditional criminal methods to contemporary technology. The international scope of these partnerships has also expanded dramatically. Italian-American crime families maintain active relationships with Sicilian Mafia groups, 'Ndrangheta organizations in Calabria, and Camorra networks in Naples. Simultaneously, motorcycle clubs like the Hells Angels operate chapters across 6 continents, creating opportunities for truly global criminal enterprises. Recent law enforcement operations have revealed sophisticated money laundering networks, where motorcycle clubs provide transportation and muscle for drug operations coordinated by traditional mafia families, while profits are invested in legitimate businesses controlled by both organizations. These partnerships generate revenue streams that dwarf the simple protection rackets and territorial disputes of earlier eras. The most successful modern partnerships combine the international connections and political corruption expertise of traditional mafia families with the mobility, technological adaptation, and violent capabilities of motorcycle clubs. This hybrid model has proven remarkably resilient to law enforcement efforts and continues to evolve as both types of organizations learn from each other's strengths. The future of criminal alliances between biker gangs and the mafia has fundamentally transformed organized crime in North America and beyond. What began as territorial conflicts and crude extortion attempts has evolved into sophisticated criminal partnerships that combine the best elements of both organizational models. From the Pagans forcing the Philadelphia Mafia to pay damages, to the Rizzuto family's billion-dollar consortium with the Hells Angels, to the Blood Family Mafia's digital age rebellion against traditional hierarchies, these relationships have consistently challenged conventional understanding of how criminal organizations operate. The most significant lesson from decades of biker mafia interactions is that successful criminal organizations must adapt or face extinction. The Italian-American mafia families that survived and prospered were those that learned to work with motorcycle clubs as equals rather than trying to dominate them. Meanwhile, motorcycle clubs that embraced international drug trafficking and sophisticated financial operations became more powerful and profitable than ever before. As law enforcement continues to evolve its tactics against organized crime, these hybrid criminal networks are likely to become even more sophisticated, international, and technologically advanced. The future of organized crime isn't about bikers versus the mafia. It's about how these once opposing forces continue to merge into something entirely new and more dangerous than either was alone. The war is over. The partnership has just begun.